Hello, NB Polypod world and listeners and viewers on Rogers TV. My name is Brent Harris, and I am coming to you live from St. John, or Mennequist, as it's called in Wolastoq. And we are on the unceded territory of the Wolastoq, the Pescatomakati, and the Mi'kmaq. And we're excited to be coming to you today to talk about the 2024 budget. And in a minute, I'm going to bring a special guest in to join us in that kind of budget breakdown, that discussion, as it was just tabled yesterday. We are not going to be joined by my fearless co-host, Joanna Killen, today. She is down and under the weather, and we weren't able to figure out a different time to bring everybody together. So it's just going to be me today. And again, special guest, I'll tease that out. But before we go into that, as always, if you ever want to get a hold of us, if there's anything on this pod that we bring up today that you want to drill us on, that you want to question us on, that you want to comment on, here's how you can do that. nbpolypod@gmail.com. You can find us on Patreon. Shout out to our politicos who are supporting us on the Patreon through Patreon. And we have a new one to announce this week, and that is Mark Brewer. So Mark is actually the host of a podcast called NB Traveler. And I've been meaning to tell everybody about this great podcast. It's short, but it's just about New Brunswick travels and locations and things like that. So amazing podcast to listen to, even if you're a New Brunswicker. Mark travels a lot. He comes from away, and he's got a different site on all these different places around the province. And as always, our other politicos, there's only room for 20 politicos. So it is a short list of people who are going to be wielding pretty major influence over our pod. Other politico is Fred LaForge. And finally, which leads me to our special guest, Sean Rouse. And I am joined here with Sean Rouse, who's been on the podcast many times, to break down this budget. Oh, you're muted there. Oh, there
Hello.
You go, Sean. Hey, Sean, how you doing?
Thanks for having me back. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Excited to get to this budget breakdown. We weren't. I didn't even.
Yeah.
Last week we were talking about bringing on Callie Lamrock, or a previous person who was potentially, or who ran for the leadership, who was potentially going to come on, TJ Harvey, for the Liberals. But I forgot the budget was this week, and so.
I think it's been under the radar for a lot of people. It's and maybe they've downplayed it just because it's more of a, I don't want to, how would you, some say lackluster, some say just stay the course, which I think we saw. It wasn't anything remarkable or earth-shattering, and we can get into some details here.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, for sure. Now, sorry for that. My computer's yelling at me here. Apologies, everybody. But, just before we get into that, so a fun little crossover. Last week, we had a ton of engagement on the Political Compass test. So thank you for everybody who did that. I saw people from all over the province. What I was amazed by, out of the about 25 people that sent us their results, is how many people showed up in that social democrat, bottom left, a little bit like, in some cases, some people were very libertarian, some people were less libertarian, but certainly socially progressive. But almost nobody kind of migrated to the north. There was only one person that was up in that more communist kind of section,
right?
Authoritarian social lean. But yeah, where did you end up on that?
And I might be able to bring it up here, but I was in the green, close to the middle, but I was like right next to Gandhi. If folks know the
yeah, you know
picture, what? I can let me see if I can just bring it up here quickly. I don't want to make people wait for me to look for things.
Well, I'll tell you, it's funny you say that you were close to Gandhi, because I was closer to Mandela, but the two are kind of along that spectrum.
Maybe it was Mandela. Ah, geez. You know what? I can't even recall now.
But my mom was close to Gandhi, and she did the test. Former Deputy Mayor Natalie Harris, if anybody's listening, down there in Blacks Harbor. And so just the different policies and positions. I like that test. For those of you who didn't take it, who want to take it, here it is one more time. The this is the address for your listen. If you're listening, it's www.politicalcompass.org/test. So it's pretty simple to remember. Even just a quick Google search, political compass test, and it's going to be this one. This one's like the most widely used one. But yeah, like over 95% of people were in that libertarian. Hey, we want less government, more localized decision making, and we also want things to be progressive and more inclusive and equitable. Less, hey, you're on your own. If you're a billionaire, good for you. If you're not, sucks to suck. Less of that disposition, it seems. So, oh, hey, here's yours here. I'll
Yeah,
bring it up
if
there.
folks can see it. So there I am,
Yeah.
safely ensconced in the green. And I honestly thought, I always think of myself as a centrist. I'm, socially liberal, but, on physical matters, I'm more to the center. So I'm not surprised to see myself this close to the center, I guess, just this far down in the libertarian. I didn't expect. I
I
thought I'd
know.
be maybe a little higher up,
Yeah.
but I certainly don't think myself as authoritarian, but I don't really think of myself as libertarian either. So,
That's the funny one is like with this compass, you have that four quadrants, right? Where,
hmm,
and I don't think a lot of us think of ourselves as, no, like, I don't know anybody who wants authoritarian kind of
no,
rule. But at the same time, like, libertarian is a word that we often associate with like people who are looking for anarchy or who,
yeah, I
and we don't consider the idea that you can be sort of desiring the best for your neighbor and yourself and want as little government intervention to achieve that as possible. It's like,
yeah, I don't think of myself as the live free or die kind of New
mm,
Hampshire people or those. There is a group in New Brunswick. I don't know if you've heard this, but there is a group in New Brunswick who are like the sovereign citizens now, and I've run into them on Twitter now and again, and they're lobbying to make New Brunswick like this sovereign citizen home in Canada. To
wow.
that they and I think people know what sovereign citizens are. They're these people who don't recognize the Constitution. They sort of think they can just renounce being in a country and carve out a
Mm.
place where they are their own government. And okay, I mean, did you travel on the roads to get to your house? I
Yeah,
mean, you can't really
I know.
separate yourself from the state very easily, but
Yeah, yeah, I loved that. I showed that meme last week about the like libertarian snow removal, right? Where it's like the sovereign
yes,
the sovereign citizen
that's
snow
right.
removal is like, hey, your driveway's shoveled, but the main road isn't shared in common by anybody who actually plows it. And like, it's not like we couldn't all like combine our forces as a neighborhood and get our road plowed, but now we have to go to the next neighborhood and make sure that the road connecting us to theirs is plowed. And hey, now before
Right.
too long we've got a government. All right, let's get to the budget. That's the main point for this, but let's, before we go right into the numbers, the budget is more than just a numbers document. It is a system of values, and in an election year, the budget is basically a platform for the governing party. So, what do we know about the current? We've talked about this, a lot over the past about the current resting position of the progressive conservatives. Um, but I think it's worth diving into a great conversation that you sparked on Twitter, Sean. So anybody who's not following Sean, Sean's a common contributor to our conversation here at the MB Polypod, either directly in person like this, or just through Twitter chats. And like we end up going to similar events, like we were this weekend together. Um, and we don't always agree on everything, but
Yeah.
certainly like you're in those same zones having those conversations with a take that has, you support with your reasons, and we can have that fair kind of back and forth, which is great. But I guess to set the stage a little bit here, we talked about some polling data that may misconstrue the reality a little bit, because when we looked at the polling data that came out of the recent narrative research data, it showed the progressive conservatives kind of holding around that 30% support mark. Um, and I guess it was 26, 24. I'm trying to remember now. I can potentially bring it up here in a second if I can find that. But what that doesn't show us, and this is what I think is important about polling, there are a lot of lagging indicators with polls, and the types of questions that get asked are important. So the poll did ask who was the best premier for the province. But what is interesting about even the narrative research data that we talked about, you can go back a few podcasts if you are interested and listen to that breakdown of those numbers, is that the conservative, the preferred leadership for Premier Higgs, it differs quite a bit from the who would you vote for if an election were called. Um, and those lagging indicators, what we call those in polling, and I am not a pollster. I did not go to school, like full disclosure. But from what I've learned about it, things like inflation. As inflation rises, even if it comes back down to 2% for 3 or 4 quarters, the results are that people feel the pain of that for a lot longer, and their opinion of the government of the day that has some part to play in inflation or managing the outcome, or the, in this case, the fallout of inflation rising, their opinions lag. So, and the closer you get to the election day, then the smaller the margin of error. So I want to suggest that this Angus Reid stuff that we're going to get into here, with the kind of the thinking of people, because it's a different poll, probably gets us closer to the resting state of New Brunswickers, um, leading into this budget. So I'll bring that up now. So just let us know, what are we looking at here? I don't know if you can zoom that in any on your end, Sean, but if you
Might be
can,
able to. Let me try.
uh, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's a
getting
little bit
great.
better.
Oh yeah, that's much
Oh,
better there.
okay,
Yeah.
there we go.
So what are we looking at
Oh,
here?
so just right off the top, Angus Reid would have, looked back at how the provincial Tories were trending since 2019. So we know they when they were elected, and in 2020, and we can see sort of their low points and high points since then. So they definitely have trended downwards since then. I mean, overall. So this is a tweeted summary that I would have
Hmm.
put out there. So you can sort of see the Canadian average and then where New Brunswick is. So just so you can compare. And that's this is one of my favorite polls, to be honest, because like you say, the narrative research poll and the one that came out a couple of days before this, just like, who's your favorite party? Who's your favorite leader? Who would you vote for? And then these polls sort of get into what's your satisfaction level on each of these areas of the government. And and we can go down through each of them because I find there's
Yeah.
some really interesting stuff. But just in general, it starts off with where is the province trending versus the Canadian average, and that's not the average federally. That's how does New Brunswick compare opinion wise to other provinces. So compared to other provinces, we would have the lowest satisfaction level with our provincial government in this preliminary stat. Um, so continuing, and maybe I'll just start with this one and break it down
Yep.
a little more granularly at first, and then the others are similar. So you can see this first line here is, is it, is it are they doing a very good job? Are they doing a good job? Are they doing a very good job, poor job, very poor job, or I don't know, unsure.
Hmm.
So you can see all the different provinces except for PI there because the sample is too small, so they can't really get a reliable sample from PI. But it sort of breaks it down in the way, and you'll see on subsequent pictures here, the bottom two rows. I didn't include it in this one, but the bottom two rows, they add up the very good jobs and the good jobs, and that sort of gives you the satisfaction level for that particular item.
Mm.
And then they add up the poor jobs, the very poor jobs, and that gives you the dissatisfaction level. So overall, in general, New Brunswickers have the lowest satisfaction levels in Canada with the job their government is doing, according to this poll.
Mm.
So, for example, the first one, the one that everyone cares about, healthcare. What is the satisfaction level with healthcare in New Brunswick right now? So you look at the New Brunswick column here and you see the very good job, 1% of the polled New Brunswickers said the government is doing a very good job with healthcare. And then the good jobs is 7%. So that it adds up to only an 8% approval rating in healthcare right now. And it's like, well, healthcare is always, controversial. No one's ever really satisfied with healthcare, so that's not a big deal. We're just like everyone else. Someone said that to me on Twitter. It's like, no, we're the lowest actually. So
Yep.
if you look at the totals column over towards the left here, if you add up the very good and the good jobs, the total is 25%. So the average satisfaction level nationally with the province's job performance with healthcare would be 25%.
Mm.
And we're at 8%. And if you look at the very good jobs, we have the lowest very good jobs at 1% and the lowest good jobs at 7%. So
Mm.
definitely the highest level of dissatisfaction with how the government in the province is managing healthcare.
Yeah, and like to comment on, we can posit all kinds of reasons to why this is, but I think there's a pretty clean connection we can make. The amount of growth that this province has experienced is unprecedented. We've seen the headlines come up from the CBC about, um, really the province was at a resting population of around 750 to 760,000 people for like 30 years. And in the so like one of the headlines we saw in
Right.
2023 was that the province had grown more in 3 years than it did in the previous 30. And when I was a kid and I could go to Blacks Harbor outpatients for care, right?
Yep.
I remember that. Like I'm 34 years old and so I'm trying to come up with reasons why New Brunswickers are so dissatisfied. And and I can remember being able to Blacks Harbor to get to the ER to get a broken limb looked after. No, it wasn't a broken limb. I fell off my bike down by the ferry and really messed myself up. Anyway, like I had to go to Blacks. Now, in my lifetime, Blacks Harbor closed, but I could still go to St. Stephen, and there was still some stuff in
Right.
St.
Right.
George, or there was a couple family doctors that would have room for. Like I can remember that level of care. I can't even begin to imagine how I would get that level of care now
No one
because
can.
you're right. We've added almost 100,000 people to this province in the past 5 years and 4 years. And with that level of growth, we have not seen a right sizing of the healthcare expenditure, in my opinion, which we're going to get to with this budget. That's one of the things on this budget.
Right.
And I agree with you. I think this memory that we have that's recent of better care being possible um, is really a sticking point for a lot of us. But I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, and a lot of people who answer these polls are people of all ages. So there are folks who are a little bit older, older than us even. I'm 50s, people who are my parents' age or older who
Yep.
remember, when it was, they could get health care, just about anywhere in the province. And if you think, again, this is healthcare is pretty nebulous. What are we talking about when we say healthcare? Do you have
Mm.
a family doctor? Are you waiting for a specialist? If so, how long? If you call an ambulance, how long does it take for them to show up? If you're sick and you don't have a family doctor, can you get into a clinic? Can you get help when you need it? If you go to a hospital, how long are you gonna sit in the waiting room? Uh, I remember being at the hospital recently. My daughter broke her ankle, and the nurses were so happy. They said the hospital's only at 140% capacity. That's great. That's the lowest we've seen
What a
in
great time for you to
months.
come.
It's like, yeah, well, yeah, it sounds okay, but 140% capacity sounds awful still. I
Yeah.
mean, it still sounds like people are working really hard to keep up with the patient load. And again, as we heard in Lamrock's report, these are people who are getting caught by the safety net. This isn't the preventive care or the primary care or people that getting in to see their family doctors. This is people who are ending up in the ERs who are supposed to be in nursing homes, but they don't have anywhere else to go. They end up at the hospital.
Yep. Yeah, I know. It's such a leading. This is one of those ones, and I'll put this back up people to see. This is a leading indicator, right? Heading into an election year, how
Hmm.
many people are upset with healthcare? If we remember correctly, down in Nova Scotia, when Tim Houston was running against Rankin, was it? What was
Yeah,
his? Ian Rankin?
I think.
Was it
Yeah,
Ian? Anyway, I think it was Ian.
I
One of the
can't recall.
Yeah, me either. But he was the Liberal candidate, and he was the front runner, and he was, it was a pandemic, and everybody was expecting the same reality for a pandemic election where everybody's like, no, we got to keep the government the way it is. We can't upset the apple cart now. But Tim Houston came in the last 2 weeks and just blew everybody's mind with all these announcements about what his government was going to do for healthcare.
Right.
And he won a
Yep,
majority, and it
he
upset
did.
the entire status quo around pandemic elections. So I dare say, without something ambitious on the table in this budget for healthcare, I don't know that the government's following best practice here to avoid upset, because the reality is a lot of people in Canada think that a lot of things are broken, and it's
That's right.
pretty hard to be a sitting government and say, well, that's not on us, that's on, like, what their favorite thing to do right now is say, well, it's Justin Trudeau's fault,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're also a government, so people are going to air their grievances and take things out on you. And if you're going to change your mind about you got to put something ambitious there. So we're going to come to the healthcare. We're going to spend some time talking about that on budget. But what else do we have for this Angus Reid kind of breakdown? What's another couple of
Right.
good points you want to show us?
So I'll try to keep in mind that there's folks just listening to the audio here. So good and very good, 8%, lowest in Canada for healthcare satisfaction. Now, let me scroll down a bit. Uh, Now, if you look at overall satisfaction with jobs, something that the Higgs government would say they do a pretty good job at,
Certainly where they want to
uh,
focus, they would say that they're focused on that. Yep.
absolutely 29%. Again, the lowest in Canada. Uh,
Wow.
so 29%, 63% disapprove of the job the provincial government is doing with regards to the jobs and economy. And that is compared to an average dissatisfaction rate of 52%. So no one thinks their government's doing a great job. Some people think, like if we see Alberta is a little higher than the average satisfaction. Saskatchewan's a little higher than the average. New Brunswick is the lowest by far, though.
Wow. So we're going to come back to that because we're going to have to talk about some assumptions that this budget makes about the future growth of the province, and maybe we can comment on why the economy is considered to be so bad under the current regime. Um, I look at that and I'm like, it's hard because we see some of the lowest unemployment in the country, or sorry, in
Right.
our province's history. I mean, even in St. John, where we've normally had a much higher resting state of unemployment and poverty, um, unemployment's way down, and job vacancies are way up. And I just met with somebody from the Construction Association the other day, and they listed 15 companies around the province that are so desperate for housing that they're willing to build it themselves, and
Yeah. Yep.
and because it's holding their company back so much. So I see that energy in the economy, and I'm like, why isn't it translating to an approval rating from people? But
Yeah,
what?
I
Yeah,
I think right now wages are depressed. I think with the cost of living, what you're taking home isn't going as far as it used to, and there's no the raises people are getting are few and far between right now. It's everything's in a crunch with the affordability crisis, and companies are crunched, people are crunched, and things like the $300 payment, is that helping you out, or
yeah, right.
does it just show up in your mailbox or your bank account, or did you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get it? So I think things like that, that payment, when you think, I'm sure the premier wanted it to be a good news story. Uh, I think it ends up being, very frustrating for people who are desperate for help, who can't put food on the table or fill up their gas tank, and then it's like, we'll give you $300 of help if you if you go through all these multiple steps, and then we evaluate you, and then we decide whether you deserve it or not. And it's like, well, I mean, that's
Well, and my worry here is like as a person who qualified for that money, because not everybody qualifies. You got to be making under $70,000, and
right.
and all of that as a household, I believe.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's not. I mean, there's a lot of people in that category for sure, but if you're in a boat that I am with kids, $300 isn't changing my world at all.
No,
Do I like that money was there? Yes. Does it do something to alleviate my expenditures for 1 month? Yes. But I think we're all asking for 3-hour wait times instead of 9. And I think we're all asking for, you know, a pretty large difference in our earning power, if you will, or
right.
earning power or spending power. If my dollar went further, that's more important to me than having a momentary $300. And I think that's why it doesn't translate. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, we can see in that poll, I mean, out of the factors that people believe the provincial government controls to help with the jobs and the economy, people believe in the province that the Tories are doing the worst job in Canada compared to their peers.
right. Yeah.
And we can, I'm sure they would argue, oh, we're not that bad, or we're doing better than people are saying or people believe. That's what people think.
Yeah.
That's what this poll shows.
Okay, so let's try to do two more here because I don't know how many you had, but let's try to do a couple more.
I, you know me, I dove right into it. I think I tweeted out 10 of these. So,
Yeah,
and this is just a summary view. And I can even go through them faster.
sure.
So, related to what we just talked about, lowest overall satisfaction with the cost of living and inflation in New Brunswick in Canada. So, the average satisfaction level, again, comparing us to all what people think. Again, we're not comparing to the federal government. This is a province by province comparison. So, compared to all the other provinces, we have the lowest satisfaction level,
Of how we've managed
12%.
the cost of living and inflation.
Exactly, compared to the average of 19 nationally.
Wow.
Um,
Well, and like on that, you got to look at housing, right? Cost of living, like
and that's the next one.
yeah, okay, go ahead.
So 9% lowest again in Canada. Uh,
Wow.
far by far the lowest satisfaction level, the only single digit satisfaction level. 87% of people in the province are dissatisfied with the job that the provincial government is doing with regards to housing affordability.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the top lines there. There's nobody that's considered to be doing a good job in this province, and
Yeah.
on the housing file, with it looks like I think that's 8% in Saskatchewan. Or think that the
Yes. Yeah.
so, and then like you look at the good job sections, that's where you see a lot of people in the double digits. Certainly Alberta at 21, Saskatchewan 29,
Yeah.
Manitoba at 23. And then you see Quebec, New Brunswick, down in the single digits. But even Nova Scotia and Newfoundland are perceived to be doing better on that. Like it's, but yeah,
Exactly.
like you say, I think we're seeing major rent hikes, and everybody's got massive property assessment tax hikes. So again, you go back to that $300 handout that the province gave to certain people. For a lot of people, if you own a home, that didn't even cover 1 year's increase change. Never mind the last 3 years. So
Yeah.
what else we got
So
here?
I'll keep scrolling, and we won't dwell on these as long. Poverty and homelessness, lowest overall satisfaction again in New Brunswick. Only 11% say the government is doing a good or very good job. Uh, Second lowest overall satisfaction level regarding the environment and climate change.
Okay, who's worse?
So,
Who's
who
worse
is
than us? I was just
worse?
curious because this is the only one where we like
Ontario.
Ontario's worse.
Ontario. Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
So 29% So second lowest, and Ontario has 26%.
Yep.
And the average dissatisfaction level is 33%. So we're close to the average level, um,
Yep.
but the second lowest. Lowest overall satisfaction level with education in the country. 21% say the government is doing a good or very good job.
Hmm.
So the average out of the provinces would be around 31%.
Whoa, yeah.
Uh,
We're 10 points off the average. That's pretty significant.
yeah, and when I say average, I should be cautious. So I think it's not. It's if once they do this totals column, they take a total of everybody they surveyed. So
Mm,
when they break it down by province, it is just a province, but it's not. The totals column isn't a total. It isn't a true average. It's
got it.
everybody, and then they rank everybody. They don't average it out.
Right.
So
Gotcha.
31% would be what the entire country is saying, and just New Brunswick would be 21%. Lowest satisfaction level with education
Mm.
in the country. And compared to our peers, uh, what's the second lowest? 66% would be the second lowest in Ontario and Quebec.
Yep.
So we're quite a ways off. So that's a stinging indictment. If you think about people's top priorities, education's always one of them.
Healthcare and
Uh,
education.
yeah, no one thinks they're doing a great job right now.
No. Do you want to do one
Uh,
more?
there's one more that I want to touch on just
Yep.
for personal reasons, and if folks will indulge me, this is on my Twitter page. If folks want to go look at all these different, and you can go look up the poll yourself and take a look at it. 26% lowest satisfaction level with a relationship with the federal government. This is one just around where the story of the year last year, Policy 713.
Mm.
Uh, they did do a question just for Alberta, Saskatchewan, and New Brunswick, and these would be the only three provinces who have announced that they have policies that introduce restrictions around sexual orientation, gender identity. Alberta's, of course, being the most restrictive of all those that have been proposed. So the poll question was, do you think the current government of New Brunswick is doing a good job or a poor job on recent name and gender pronoun policy in schools? So it's very specifically asking what people's opinion is on policy 713. And I think conventional knowledge, you'll hear this, I'll see this in the Telegraph Journal's comment section, and sometimes there's been, on the National Post, there's been a couple of polls that just asked very broad questions around gender pronoun policies. And the sentiment is that the public is behind them when polled specifically about the changes in schools that the Higgs government introduced. 51% say the government is doing a poor job or a very poor job with those changes.
And it looks like
So
14% just don't know.
and can you blame them? Because
No,
there's
because
so
what's the
much
truth? Yeah, what's the reality? I don't know.
there's
Yeah.
so much fear. I mean, I think we all know what the truth is, and I think
Yep.
51% of the people know the truth. But there's 14 people who are percent of people who are just saying, "There's so much stuff out there I don't even know. I can't really even make up my mind." I mean,
Yep.
I think just leave the kids alone and they're fine. But all these people are saying there's crazy things going on when I log on to the internet. So I
Yep.
don't know. So that 14% looks natural to me,
Yep.
but 51%, over half of the people are saying, the government is doing a bad job with this. We don't approve of what they're doing. They should just leave the kids alone, leave this to the kids and their families and the schools and stay out of it. And then, and 35% are saying, we think they're doing a great job, that we should, and some people say that should go further, like Alberta, which God
Well,
forbid.
yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, 35%. is what formed a majority government last time of the vote. And that's where we come to, like, it's a great setup for this conversation. All these listed areas, like you talk about, Sean, where the government is doing the worst or the second worst, and on major issues where you need to have some penetration, we're not seeing it. So let's segue to the budget. Like, this budget is, like we said, it's a document for the election that's happening in the fall, in October. The government will be referencing this budget as their platform piece. If you vote for a PC candidate, if you vote for the Progressive Conservative Party, this is the budget we will stand behind. Um, Before we get into hot takes, let's get into some hot numbers. Now, we don't have the time to get into every line. If you're interested in the budget, you can find it, and I will just bring that up. And sorry for that hiccup. Here it is. So this is what the government's talking points are on the budget. We can see here. I'll see if I can't. Yeah, that makes it so you can't see the bottom. So we can see here that the government is making the position that, this is the biggest healthcare budget in New Brunswick's history, $3.8 billion. What was it in 2023, you ask? The answer is $3.5 billion. Okay, so $68.9 million in housing. More million. That's an increase in housing. So where is that going to go? It's going to go to the New Brunswick Housing Corporation. And again, I'm breaking this down, and we're focusing on healthcare, housing, social development, education, a little bit the economy. And the reason is pretty simple. This is where the big pain points are in the province, right? Like you said, this is where some of the highest levels of disapproval are. This is where the government needs to be seen as competent, ambitious, capable, and heading in the right direction if they're going to win an election on this. And so, we're looking at that increase from housing. It's really, the housing is going to go from $129 million is what they budgeted in 23. That went up to 130 some million because they had to do some adjustments. This year, they're saying it's going to be $196 million. Social development has gone from 1.5 billion to 1.6 billion. We are seeing some increase here in old age security payments for people who are low income seniors, from $400 to $600. That's included here. And then the education is going to go from $1.7 billion in 23 to $1.9 billion in that's my number. What they're saying here is, $42.9 million to target enrollment and growth for schools that are expanding and need to grow, and 58.3 million for support for social assistance clients. That's what I'm talking about when we talk about the old age. 29.7 million in wage increases for the human services sector. Well, we know that CUPE is currently in a heated battle around some of these negotiations around wages and pensions. And so, of course, wages are going to go up. They do every year, and they should be adjusted for inflation. So the question is how's this going to look? 370 million in relief to NB taxpayers. That's the $300 check. And then 50 million to the enhanced energy savings program. So right off the top, when we break this down, these numbers can be just big and nebulous to us. So the way I find it helpful, and if you're interested, this is just the website of the province. I can also bring up here, if you want to get into the crazy version, the one second. If we want to get into actually looking at what does the budget look like in file form, well, here's what that looks like. So that's the budget, the line by line item that I've gone through a little bit to make those breakdowns. So you can find that on the government's website. Those are the talking points. Those are the numbers. What is the per capita breakdown? And this is where I think it gets interesting. And let's talk about healthcare, because healthcare was one of those major ones, like you mentioned from the top, where there's just huge disapproval of the direction of where things are going. And per capita spending on healthcare in Canada is interesting. The the population right now of New Brunswick. So this is how we find this number. We take social development and we combine it with healthcare, because when they do the aggregating, they see social development expenditures and healthcare expenditures kind of under that same umbrella of healthcare, they call it, at the federal
Mhm.
level in Stats Canada. And so that per capita spending is sort of that number that we're looking for. And I'm going to bring up a screen here that I hope will be accessible to us in a second. But the number that I landed on for this budget, when we look at the current population of New Brunswick, for healthcare is $6,367 per person that we're spending on social development and our healthcare system. And
Okay.
yeah, and so there we go. Sorry, this gets a janky focus, or it gets janky when I'm switching screens again. If you're watching on Rogers, but here it is. You can see that breakdown. So the number that we have in 2024 per capita spending on our healthcare system is $6,367. This number that you're seeing is from 2022 to 2023, right? We're not at the bottom of the barrel in per capita spending, but we are also not at the top. And if you're seeing, so again, 2022 and 2023, you see us spending $6,727 per capita, and we're spending less per capita in 24 heading in 25 because our population's up. We're almost 850,000 people now, right? And I guess the reason I think this is important, and let's play some tennis here back and forth on how we think this might play out politically for the government. But with this growth, this unprecedented growth, like anything, if I'm offering you $10 a brick to build a house, and Manitoba's offering you $9.50 and Nova Scotia's offering you $10.50, and you've got lots of bricks, right? You're going to do business with all of us, but you're going to do business with the people that are paying you the most first, right?
For sure. Of course. Yeah.
But if New Brunswick needs 20,000 bricks, and normally we've only needed 10,000 bricks, right? This is just this thought experiment that it's very simple. Our needs have increased a lot. And so the expenditures you would expect per person to right size the healthcare system to keep up with the demand and to meet the new growth trajectories should be not equitable, right? You kind of understand in
Absolutely.
in order to build that brick house that I need with the number of bricks I need, I now need to outbid every other person in the market for that brick so that I have enough bricks. We're not doing
Right.
that. And so, like, do you think the government's statement here is going to rub off on their approval rating where they say this is the biggest healthcare expenditure of all time?
Well, that was the first thing I looked at. And of course, if I look at that same poll that we just talked about, it does talk about what are New Brunswickers' top issues. Number one issue, 74% of New Brunswickers say their number one issue is healthcare. And again, the 8% satisfaction level is what they're rating. So that was, and I think a lot of people are like that. Immediately went and looked at what that healthcare expenditure was. And it was really interesting. Now, what they say is true, that the budget number has increased $214 million new money into the system.
And they are putting a little bit,
However,
and just to add to that, before you did, however, they are putting some more money into capital. So
yep,
the capital and operations budgets are different. Like you have to look at both sides a bit.
sure,
But the operations of a hospital are the big numbers, right? Sorry to cut
yep,
you off.
not at
However,
all.
yeah,
Yeah, so the number that they have in the budget for this year versus last year is $214 million higher. However, what they spent last year was also 213 or $212 million higher than they budgeted.
that was
And this was
crazy.
something that Andrew Waugh and other reporters brought to light immediately is, if yes, the budget has gone up, and it should go up when you think about the population increases that we've had. So, how much did they actually spend? $212 million more than they budgeted last year.
So they
And what did
budgeted,
they?
yeah, they budgeted $3.5 billion last year at the outset of the budget, and they ended up spending, you're saying, around 3.723 billion.
Right. Well, this is, and again, these are reported figures that I'm
Yep.
taking these right from the media. So,
Right.
uh, they spent 200 and say 12 million more than they budgeted last year. And
Mm,
where did they set the budget for this year? 214 million, or 214 million higher than last year.
right.
So the actual increase in spending for this year versus last year is only $1.7 million more. And it's like, yeah, okay. It went up, sure, versus the budget. But the spending that we have right now that has an 8% approval rating in the province is virtually the same for next year as it was this past year.
And
So
and they're
they're
predicting a
spending,
yeah, they're predicting a $48 million surplus.
yes. So
And
they've got
yeah,
money. I mean, they're only, so basically, yeah, they're spending more money, and it's probably the biggest budget there's ever been. And those are all true statements. Every year, it's always the biggest budget. They are always spending more money than they did the previous year in healthcare. So it's no, shocker. It's no achievement to spend more. They plan to spend more. That's something they need to do. Uh, One question that was raised on Twitter to me was, if you account for the population growth, uh, is did the actual increase in funding correspond to it per capita? In other words, we've got more people. We grow the budget to match the amount of people that we've grown in the past couple of years?
the answer is we
Um,
went, from what I can see, is we went down.
Yeah, and that's what Robert Jones reported uh, earlier this year too. I haven't seen any updates to his reporting yet, but yeah, he's saying, well, if you think about how much we've gone up in population and how much we've grown, the per capita spending per person is actually down.
Mm.
So we've cut the spending essentially. Yeah, we should have increased it more, and if you look at what we just spent this previous year and what we plan to spend next year, they're virtually identical. So if we're not spending any more, so what's our strategy to get to, if it's 73% of New Brunswickers say this is the most important thing and we've got an 8% satisfaction level, or we're not spending any more money, how are we going to get there? And they're saying, well, we'll cancel some of those nursing contracts and free up some money there. And
Yeah,
it
the
won't be new
travel
money, it's money that's already in the system. Okay, good luck. Some of those contracts are signed to 2026. So,
Yeah, and the travel nurses are never going to go away because we've
no.
outsourced the entire system to Medivie and Horizon Health. And you can't turn, those are not our ships to turn. They're just our ships to give money to.
Right.
And people think it's our healthcare system. I'm sorry, but you guys, we don't have control of our healthcare system like we used to. And Ambulance NB, same deal. We've semi-privatized the delivery of this. Um, to these organizations that are for-profit organizations, and so I struggle here to imagine a pathway for victory for the Conservatives just on healthcare.
Well, just on these issues alone, I mean, the polling is a different thing and how it all breaks down, but just, is this budget give them any extra money? If the answer is money, and we saw the New Brunswick Medical Society rather, say we need, in addition to what we just spent, we need 600 million more urgently to get where we should be as a province. And what are we seeing net new spending versus last year's? Virtually, 1.7 million is the answer. So there's virtually, yes, it's the highest we've ever spent. It's 214 more than we budgeted last year. and we'll give the government credit for that. Then they're spoke in the legislature this morning, and they stuck to those numbers and trumpeted those numbers. What they're not saying is they spent the same money last year as they're projecting for next year. So if what they're saying is they're going to make improvements and not spend any more money than they spent last year. I don't know how that happens, especially when the New Brunswick Medical Society is saying we need 600 million net new investment this year, or this next year, to get where we should be.
I know. Um, Sean, I realize you have to run you have a timeline. We got probably 8-9 more minutes I was going to get into, but do you want to jet off now and I'll continue just talking about some of the other numbers, or you got a few more
I
minutes?
could stay for a few more minutes.
Okay. So I wanted to do another, just go through the next one, and that's healthcare. Hard to see a pathway. Education. The Fraser Institute did a big breakdown in 2022, breaking down some expenditures in 21. Now, what we're seeing in education expenditures, New Brunswick is at around $15,785 per student, right? The per capita breakdown here can look a number of different ways. If we looked at what the education spending was per person, per taxpayer, if you will, or not taxpayer, but per person in New Brunswick per capita, we're at $2,240. But per student, that's an interesting way to look at it, and a helpful way in some cases. And $15,785 puts us not at the bottom of the barrel. But I go back to my original point. How can we be in the middle of the track when we've got an education system that was built for a diminishing number of students every year, right? That was built on a resting state for 30 years. The population was almost stagnant, and then it blew up. How can we not be spending some of the most money in the country on education, so that we add the schools, we get the critical mass of teachers, we recruit teachers to come here from other provinces? That's not happening here either on education. Um, where did education score as far as level of importance for New Brunswickers, in their top priorities?
Interestingly, it didn't make in this latest poll. It wasn't in. So we had healthcare at 74%. We had cost of living and inflation at 63%.
Yep.
Housing affordability was next at 33%. Poverty and homelessness, jobs in the economy, and environment and climate change were all higher than education.
Okay.
So housing affordability, 33%, poverty and homelessness, 22%. And the economy and jobs and environment and climate change were at 16%. So it goes to show, if you think about what people are focused on right now, it's more of these day-to-day concerns than it is the schools, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'm thinking I've got, between healthcare and cost of living and paying my bills and having some place to live, and people around me who are sleeping outdoors in the winter and who are having trouble finding a job. And oh, by the way, the environment and climate are crazy, and we're worst flooding in history in Sussex that we just saw. Those are all top in this most recent poll, more top of mind than
and I
than
guess
education.
I guess it leaves me to the final question I guess we can ask ourselves on this is, do we think the door, because their point that, the conservatives' point's always, well, we're paying down the debt, and look, geez, we're making $600 million a year in payments to service the debt, and imagine if we freed that money up. I guess it's that has been their pitch to the electorate for a very long time. And it's not
Right.
it's not paying dividends for them, because it's not a priority of New Brunswickers to have a balanced budget or pay down the debt. It just doesn't show up. Education, like you said, didn't even show up. But the cost of living piece, now in this economic statement that they're making, this budget, they're saying 0.7% is the GDP forecasted increase. And so if the economy grows at 0.7%, and whatever their projections were for population, we expect to have a $49 million surplus. what why wouldn't the government, I guess, score on this empty net and say, hey, we realize everything is difficult, we're behind, population is exploding, and we need to make integral investments now. Here is a $100 million deficit budget that we need to run for 2 more years. You know, like you said,
Right.
$600 million is needed for the healthcare system. Housing, my God, we're only throwing $196 million at this. But that's not even that's not in capital. If you look at $160 million, if we just spent that on unit creation, with the average unit costing 275,000, you'd create 712 units in this province, and
Right.
we're deficit more like 1,500. So I don't see how they
Now,
have pathway here. But what are your thoughts?
just the folks who talk to me on Twitter saying, paying down the debt, we now pay $100 million less in interest a year, and that's a good thing. Absolutely, it's a good thing, and that's important to pay down the debt. It's not the most important thing, and it's not the most important thing to New Brunswickers. And they're clearly telling the government they're not happy with the job they're doing.
Mm,
So I think, why. So I think your question is, why didn't the government make more of a gesture? Why didn't it spend the surplus? Why didn't it, budget for just $1 million surplus and put the rest of it into? I think this is Blaine Higgs's ideological management beliefs, is that there's never going to be enough money. People are never going to be happy with it. You can spend, and people are still going to be upset. So you have to run a balanced ship. You have to have a good balance sheet, so to speak. And this is what you're going to get with me. You're going to get good management, and that's the most important thing. I mean, we've seen $2 billion in surpluses in the past 3 years, and we've have the lowest satisfaction level with how our provincial government is doing their job in the country. And yes, that $100 million a year less in interest, that is important. It is a good thing, and I'm not saying it's not. But if you look at where people are concerned, it's not with paying down our debt, and it's not with saving money on interest payments. And yeah, I think the government should take a cue from New Brunswickers when they're saying this is not important to us right now. This is, the things that are important to us are the things that we're rating you low on, because we want you to spend more money. We want you to do a better job.
mm. No, it's too true. Well, we may have to keep this conversation going. We do want to do a deep dive on the Lamrock report and kind of bat some stuff
Yes.
around here. I think there's probably some crossover conversation to have about the Lamrock report and this budget in the future. But I've already taken too much of your time, and I know you've got to run. And for our listeners on Rogers, we're at time as well. And for our audio listeners, however, you can continue on.